Jason walked into the coffee shop that afternoon, looking for nothing but a quiet corner and a few hours of work. No drama, no complications. But halfway to his usual table, he saw her. Margaret, his ex-wife's mother, sitting alone by the window, head down, staring at a cup of cold coffee. Her eyes carried something he recognized immediately. Shame. Pain. He could turn around, pretend he never saw her. But then he noticed the whispers starting around the room, the stares pointing her way. One choice now, he realized. Walk away or change everything. What would he do? Jason had come to this coffee shop for 3 years now, always choosing the same corner table near the back, where the light stayed soft and the noise stayed low. He carried his laptop in one hand and a worn leather bag in the other, moving through the afternoon crowd with the practiced efficiency of someone who preferred to go unnoticed. The shop smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, and the hum of conversation blended into a backdrop he found easier to work through than silence. He was a single father now, though he rarely thought of himself that way. He thought of himself as someone trying to keep his head down and his life simple. Work. Pick up his daughter from school. Make dinner. Help with homework. Repeat. The divorce had happened 2 years ago, clean and quiet, the kind that left no dramatic scars, but plenty of small ones that never quite healed. He did not talk about it much. He did not talk about much of anything anymore. The barista waved at him as he walked in, already reaching for the cup she knew he wanted. Black coffee, no sugar, nothing fancy. Jason nodded his thanks and moved toward his usual spot, his mind already sorting through the work emails he needed to answer before the evening. But then he saw her. Margaret sat alone by the window, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that looked like it had been sitting there untouched for some time. Her head was down, her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. She wore a navy cardigan over a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a way that looked rushed, and her face carried an expression Jason recognized immediately. Shame. The kind that made people shrink into themselves and hope no one was watching. He stopped walking. His first instinct was to turn around, pretend he had not seen her, and find a different seat on the other side of the room. It would be easier that way, less complicated. But something in the way she sat there, alone and small, kept him from moving. Margaret had been his mother-in-law once, back when he was married to her daughter Sarah. Even after the divorce, she still came by to see his daughter Emma, bringing small gifts and spending afternoons playing games on the living room floor. She never blamed him. She never made him feel like he had failed. Jason glanced around the coffee shop. A few people were already looking in Margaret's direction, their eyes flicking toward her and then away, their heads leaning together as they whispered. He could see the judgment forming, the questions people asked when they saw someone sitting alone like that. He did not know why she was here or what had happened, but he knew what it looked like. It looked like someone waiting for someone who never showed up. He walked over. Margaret did not notice him at first. She was staring down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim in slow, absent circles. When Jason stopped beside the table, she looked up, and for a second, her eyes went wide with surprise. Then something softer crossed her face. Relief, maybe, or just exhaustion. Jason, Margaret said quietly. Her voice sounded thin, like she had been holding her breath for too long. Hey, Margaret, Jason replied. He gestured toward the empty chair across from her. Mind if I sit? She blinked, then shook her head quickly. No, of course not. Please. Jason sat down, setting his laptop bag on the floor beside him. He did not say anything right away. He just looked at her, taking in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands gripped the cup, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She looked older than he remembered, though it had only been a few months since he last saw her. Or maybe it was not age. Maybe it was just sadness. You okay? Jason asked finally. Margaret tried to smile, but it did not reach her eyes. I'm fine. Just having some coffee. Jason did not believe her, but he did not push. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and nodded toward the cup in her hands. Looks like it's been sitting there a while. She glanced down at it, then let out a soft, bitter laugh. Yeah, it has. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the coffee shop continued its afternoon rhythm. Cups clinking, conversations overlapping, the espresso machine hissing in the background. But at their table, the air felt heavier, like something unspoken was pressing down on both of them. Margaret set the cup down and folded her hands in her lap. She looked out the window, watching the street outside, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. I was supposed to meet someone here. Jason frowned. A friend? No, Margaret said. She hesitated, then added, a date. From one of those apps. Jason did not know what to say to that. He had heard about people using dating apps, seen the commercials, but he had never used one himself. The idea of it seemed strange to him, putting yourself out there like that, hoping someone on the other side of a screen would see something worth their time. But he did not say any of that. He just nodded and waited for her to continue. He came, Margaret said. Her hands tightened in her lap. He walked in, looked at me, and then he said the photos I used made me look younger than I am. He said we weren't a good match. And then he left. Jason felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at Margaret, at the way her shoulders curved inward, at the way she would not meet his eyes. She was in her early 50s, divorced for years now, and still carrying the weight of someone else's cruelty like it was something she deserved. I'm sorry, Jason said. The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. Margaret shook her head quickly. It's fine, really. I shouldn't have expected anything different. That's not true, Jason said, his voice firmer now. What he did was cruel. That's on him, not you. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were wet. I used old photos. I thought maybe if I looked better in the pictures, then maybe someone would give me a chance. But I guess that was foolish. It wasn't foolish, Jason said. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. You wanted to feel confident. There's nothing wrong with that. Margaret looked away again, her jaw tight. I just thought maybe I still had something to offer, but clearly I don't. Jason wanted to argue with her, wanted to tell her she was wrong, but he could see she was not ready to hear it. So instead, he changed the subject. How's Emma been? She still talks about the last time you came over. You brought her that puzzle with the dinosaurs, right? Margaret's expression softened slightly. She liked that? She loved it, Jason said. Worked on it for 3 days straight. Wouldn't let me help. For the first time since he sat down, Margaret smiled. A real one. Small, but real. She's a smart girl, takes after her mother. And her grandmother, Jason added. Margaret shook her head, but the smile stayed. You're too kind. Jason shrugged. I'm just honest. They talked for a while after that, about Emma, about the weather, about nothing important. Jason ordered another coffee for Margaret and a refill for himself, and she drank it slowly, her posture relaxing bit by bit. But even as they talked, Jason could feel the weight of the room pressing in on them. People were still looking. A woman at the table near the window kept glancing their way, her companion leaning in to whisper. 2 men by the counter shot curious looks in their direction. It was the kind of attention that built quietly, the way gossip always did. Margaret noticed it too. He could see it in the way her shoulders started to tense again, in the way her gaze kept flicking toward the other tables. She set her cup down and cleared her throat. I should probably go. I've taken up enough of your time." "You haven't," Jason said. "And I'm not in any rush." Margaret looked at him, uncertainty flickering across her face. "People are watching us. Let them," Jason said quietly. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "They're going to think things. About why you're here with me. What I think matters more than what they think," Jason said. He held her gaze. "And I think you came here hoping for something good, and you got treated badly instead. That's not fair, and you shouldn't have to sit here alone feeling like it was your fault." Margaret's breath hitched, and tears welled up in her eyes again. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Jason was quiet for a moment. He thought about Sarah's family, how they had all disappeared after the divorce. Her father, her brother, the cousins who used to come to barbecues in the summer. They had all vanished, like he had never been part of their lives. But Margaret had stayed. She had kept showing up for Emma, kept treating him with dignity even when she did not have to. "Because you were kind to me when you didn't have to be," Jason said simply. "After Sarah and I split, you still came to see Emma. You never made me feel like I'd lost the right to be her father. That meant something to me." Margaret looked down at her hands, tears sliding down her cheeks now. "I knew it wasn't anyone's fault. Marriages end. It doesn't mean you stopped being Emma's father." "Exactly," Jason said. "And it doesn't mean you stopped mattering to her, or to me." Margaret wiped at her eyes, her breath shaky. She did not say anything for a long moment, just sat there crying quietly. And Jason sat with her, not saying anything more, just being there. Because sometimes that was all someone needed, just someone willing to stay. The coffee shop hummed on around them. The conversations continued. The espresso machine hissed and steamed. But at their table, something had shifted. The weight felt lighter now, like a burden shared instead of carried alone. Margaret wiped her eyes with the napkin Jason had slid across the table, her breathing still uneven but slower now. The tears had stopped, but the redness around her eyes remained, and Jason could see her trying to compose herself, straightening her shoulders and smoothing down her cardigan like she could erase what had just happened. He did not push her to talk. He just sat there, his coffee growing lukewarm in front of him, waiting until she was ready. After a few minutes, Margaret took a shaky breath and looked at him. "I'm sorry you had to see that. There's nothing to apologize for," Jason said. "I feel like there is," Margaret replied quietly. She glanced around the coffee shop, her eyes darting towards the other tables before quickly looking away. "Everyone's staring." Jason followed her gaze. She was right. The attention had not faded. If anything, it had grown more persistent. A woman at the table near the window leaned toward her friend, her eyes flicking toward Jason and Margaret before she spoke behind her hand. Two men sitting by the counter kept glancing over, their expressions somewhere between curious and judgmental. Even the barista seemed to be watching them with a little too much interest as she wiped down the counter. Jason felt the weight of it, the way the room seemed to close in around them. He had felt it before, back when the divorce was fresh, and people in his neighborhood would ask questions they thought were polite, but were really just intrusive. He had learned to ignore it then, to keep his head down and move on. But this was different. This was not about him. This was about Margaret, and he could see the way it was crushing her, the way every glance made her shrink a little more into herself. "They don't know anything about you," Jason said, his voice steady. "What they think doesn't matter." Margaret shook her head. "They see a woman my age sitting with a man your age, and they're going to assume things. That I'm desperate, that I'm pathetic." Jason leaned forward. "You're not pathetic." "Then why does it feel like I am?" Margaret's voice cracked, and she pressed her fingers to her temples. I came here thinking maybe, just maybe, I could have something normal, a conversation, a connection. But instead, I got humiliated. And now everyone in this place probably thinks I'm some lonely woman who can't even manage a simple date. Jason felt something tighten in his chest. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that no one was thinking that, but he knew it would be a lie. People were thinking exactly that. He could see it in their eyes, in the way they whispered and smiled and looked away when he caught them staring. It made him angry, the casual cruelty of it, the way people could judge someone they did not even know. "I don't think that," Jason said quietly. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes red and tired. "You're being kind, but you don't have to stay here with me. I know this is awkward." "It's not awkward," Jason said. "And I'm not just being kind, I mean what I'm saying." Margaret studied his face for a long moment, like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Then she let out a soft, bitter laugh. "You were always decent, Jason. Even when things fell apart with Sarah, you never stopped being a good person." "You were decent to me too," Jason said. "More than decent." Margaret's expression softened, and for a second, Jason thought she might start crying again. But instead, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for sitting with me. I mean it." Jason squeezed back. "You don't have to thank me." They sat like that for a moment, their hands clasped across the table, and Jason felt something shift in the air around them. The whispers did not stop, but they seemed less important now. What mattered was this: Margaret needed someone to stay, and he had stayed. That was enough. But then Margaret pulled her hand back and glanced around the room again. Her shoulders tensed. "I really should go. This is only making things worse." "You're not going anywhere," Jason said firmly. Margaret blinked at him. "Jason." "I'm serious," Jason said. He leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, but his tone resolute. "You came here to have coffee, so have coffee. Don't let one bad person ruin your whole afternoon." Margaret stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue, but could not find the words. Then, slowly, she sank back into her chair. "You're stubborn. I've been told that before," Jason replied with a small smile. Margaret shook her head, but there was the faintest hint of a smile on her lips, too. "All right, I'll stay, but only because you asked." "Good," Jason said. He picked up his coffee and took a sip. "So tell me, how's work been?" Margaret looked surprised by the question, like she had not expected him to ask about anything normal. "It's fine. Busy. The library's been doing a literacy program for kids, so we've had more people coming in." "That sounds nice," Jason said. "Emma loves the library. She's always asking me to take her." "You should bring her by sometime," Margaret said, her voice warming slightly. "I'd love to see her." "I will," Jason promised. And he meant it. They talked for a while after that, about small things. Work, books, the changing season. It was the kind of conversation that should have felt easy, but Jason could feel the tension underneath it, the awareness that they were still being watched. Margaret kept glancing towards the other tables, her hands fidgeting with her napkin, and Jason knew she was counting the minutes until she could leave without it looking like she was running away. Then the door to the coffee shop opened, and a man walked in. Jason did not recognize him at first. He was tall, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a leather jacket that looked stiff and new. He scanned the room, his expression focused, and when his eyes landed on Margaret, he stopped. Margaret saw him too. Her entire body went rigid, her face draining of color. "Oh no," she whispered. Jason frowned. "What's wrong?" Margaret did not answer. She just stared at the man, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The man walked toward them, and as he got closer, his expression shifted into something smug. He stopped a few feet away from their table and crossed his arms. "Well, well," the man said, his voice loud enough to carry. "Looks like you found someone after all." Margaret's breath hitched. I didn't what?" The man interrupted. He glanced at Jason, his eyes sweeping over him with obvious disdain. "Didn't waste any time? I can see that." Jason felt his jaw tighten. He looked at Margaret, then back at the man. "Who are you?" The man smirked. "Oh, I'm nobody. Just the guy who had the good sense to leave earlier." Jason's stomach dropped. This was him. The man from the dating app. The one who had walked out on Margaret. Margaret's voice was barely audible. "You forgot your phone." The man pulled a phone out of his jacket pocket and held it up. "Yeah, left it on the table. Careless of me." He looked at Jason again, his smirk widening. "So who's this? Your backup plan?" Margaret flinched. "No, he's a friend," Jason said, his voice cold. "Not that it's any of your business." The man laughed. "A friend? Right, sure he is." He leaned against the back of an empty chair. "You know, I thought maybe I was a little harsh earlier, but now I see I was right to leave. You're not looking for a real connection. You're just looking for someone to make you feel better about yourself." Margaret's hands were shaking now, her face crumpling. Jason could see her trying to hold it together, trying not to break down in front of this man, but she was losing the battle. The entire coffee shop had gone quiet now. Every conversation stopped. Every pair of eyes turned toward their table. "You don't know anything about her," Jason said, his voice sharp. The man raised an eyebrow. "Don't I? She used photos that weren't accurate. That tells me everything I need to know about her honesty. It tells you she wanted to feel good about herself." Jason shot back. "Which is something you clearly know nothing about." The man's smirk faltered, but only for a second. "Listen, kid, I don't know what your deal is, but maybe you should stay out of this. Maybe you should leave," Jason said. The man laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "You're defending her? Really? Look at her. She's what, 52, 53? And you're sitting here pretending like she's worth your time?" Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Stop," she said, her voice shaking. "Just stop." Jason reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I need to go," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't do this." "Margaret, wait." Jason started, but she was already moving, grabbing her purse and turning toward the door. The man stepped aside with an exaggerated gesture, his expression mocking, and Jason felt something hot and furious rise in his chest. Margaret made it 3 steps before Jason stood up. "No." She stopped, her back to him, her shoulders trembling. The entire coffee shop was watching now, the silence so thick it felt like it might shatter. "You're not leaving like this," Jason said, his voice calm but firm. He walked around the table and gently touched her arm. "What he said doesn't define you. Don't let him make you feel like it does." Margaret turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "Everyone's staring, Jason. They all think—" "I don't care what they think," Jason said. He looked at the man, who was still standing there with that smug expression. "And you shouldn't either." The man scoffed. "This is pathetic." Jason turned to face him fully now, his anger no longer something he could hide. "You know what's pathetic? Coming back here just to humiliate someone who showed up in good faith. She agreed to meet you. She was here on time, and you walked out because she didn't look exactly like her photos. That says a lot more about you than it does about her." The man's face darkened. "Watch your mouth, kid." "Or what?" Jason said. He stepped closer, his voice dropping, but losing none of its intensity. You're going to insult her some more? Make her feel even worse? Because that seems to be all you're capable of. Margaret grabbed Jason's arm. Jason, please, let's just go. But Jason did not move. He kept his eyes locked on the man. She deserves better than you, and if you can't see that, then you're the one missing out. Not her. The man opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He looked around the coffee shop, at all the faces watching him, and for the first time, he seemed uncomfortable. The smirk faded. He grabbed his phone and shoved it into his pocket. Whatever, he muttered. You two deserve each other. He turned and walked towards the door, his footsteps heavy. The door swung shut behind him, and the coffee shop stayed silent for a long moment before the conversation slowly started up again. But this time, the tone was different, quieter, more respectful. Jason turned back to Margaret. She was staring at him, her eyes wide and red, her hands still shaking. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Yes, I did, Jason said. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. Come on, let's get out of here. Margaret nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. Jason grabbed his bag, left some bills on the table to cover both their drinks, and led her towards the door. As they walked out, he could feel the eyes of the entire room following them, but he did not care. Not anymore. The afternoon air outside the coffee shop was cool and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating weight of the room they had just left. Jason kept his hand on Margaret's arm as they walked, guiding her away from the window where people inside could still see them. She moved stiffly, like her legs were not quite working right, and he could hear her breathing in short, uneven gasps. They made it half a block before she stopped and pressed her hand against a brick wall, her head dropping forward. I can't believe that just happened, Margaret said, her voice raw. I can't believe you did that. Jason stood beside her, his hands in his pockets now, giving her space but staying close. He had it coming. Maybe, Margaret said. She looked up at him, her eyes still red and swollen. But now people are going to talk about you, about us. They're going to think we're together or something. Jason met her eyes. Then they'd be wrong, but it still wouldn't change anything. Margaret stared at him, her expression somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. Why are you doing this? Why are you being so good to me? Jason looked away for a moment, watching the cars pass on the street. He thought about the question, about all the easy answers he could give. Because it was the right thing to do. Because she deserved it. But those answers felt incomplete. The truth was deeper than that, and it had been sitting in his chest since the moment he saw her, sitting alone in that coffee shop. When Sarah and I got divorced, Jason said slowly. Her family stopped talking to me. Her dad, her brother, even her cousins. They all just disappeared, like I'd never existed. He looked back at Margaret. But you didn't. You kept coming by to see Emma. You brought her gifts. You played with her. You never made me feel like I'd lost the right to be her father. Margaret's breath caught. Jason, you were the only one who treated me like I still mattered. Jason continued. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, something raw and honest. And I never thanked you for that. So maybe this is me thanking you. Or maybe it's just me doing what you did for me. Being decent when it would have been easier not to. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they spilled over before she could stop them. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Jason did not say anything. He just stood there, waiting, letting her cry until she was ready to stop. When she finally lowered her hands, her face was blotchy and her mascara had smudged, but she looked at him with something softer in her eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Jason replied. Margaret wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand. I feel like such a mess. You're not a mess, Jason said. You're just someone who got treated badly by someone who wasn't worth your time in the first place. Margaret let out a shaky laugh. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, Jason said. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. That guy back there, he's the one with the problem, not you. He couldn't see what was right in front of him, and that's his loss. Margaret looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Then she took a deep breath and nodded. Okay. Jason echoed. They started walking again, slower this time, the tension in Margaret's shoulders easing with every step. The street was quiet, lined with small shops and trees that were just starting to lose their leaves. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke from someone's fireplace a few blocks away. Jason glanced at Margaret as they walked. She was looking straight ahead, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold everything together. He wanted to say something, to fill the silence, but he did not know what. So he just stayed beside her, matching her pace, and hoped that was enough. They passed a small flower stand on the corner, the kind that sold bouquets wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Jason slowed, then stopped. Margaret noticed and turned to look at him. What is it? Jason nodded toward the stand. Wait here. Before she could ask why, he walked over to the vendor, a middle-aged woman with a kind face and dirt under her fingernails. He pointed to a single white rose and handed her a few bills. The woman wrapped the rose carefully in tissue paper and handed it to him with a smile. Jason thanked her and walked back to Margaret, holding the rose out to her. Margaret stared at it, her mouth opening slightly. Jason, you didn't have to. I know, Jason said. But I wanted to. Margaret took the rose, her fingers brushing against his as she did. She looked down at it, and her eyes filled with tears again, but this time she was smiling. It's beautiful. So are you, Jason said simply. Margaret's breath hitched, and she looked up at him with an expression he could not quite read. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief, or something softer that she was not ready to name yet. You don't mean that? Yes, I do, Jason said. He stepped closer, his voice steady and sure. You're kind, you're thoughtful, you love Emma more than anything in the world, and anyone who can't see all of that is missing out. Not you. Margaret's hand trembled as she held the rose. For a moment, Jason thought she might cry again, but instead she smiled. A real smile this time, small and fragile, but real. Thank you, she whispered. Jason nodded. You're welcome. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the street fading into the background. Then Margaret looked down at the rose again and shook her head, still smiling. I haven't received a flower from anyone in... I don't even know how long. Then it's about time someone gave you one, Jason said. Margaret laughed softly, and the sound was lighter than anything he had heard from her all afternoon. She held the rose carefully against her chest. I'll keep this. Good, Jason said. He glanced at his watch and realized how much time had passed. I should probably get going. I need to pick up Emma from school soon. Margaret nodded, her smile fading slightly, but not disappearing. Of course. You don't have to stay with me any longer. You've already done so much. Are you going to be okay? Jason asked. Margaret looked at him, then at the rose in her hands. Yeah, she said quietly. I think I will be. Jason studied her face, looking for any sign that she was just saying what she thought he wanted to hear. But she seemed genuine, her expression softer now, less burdened. He nodded. Good. And if you're not, you can call me. Any time. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. Really? Really? Jason said. He pulled out his phone and handed it to her. Put your number in. I mean it. Margaret took the phone, her fingers fumbling slightly as she typed. When she handed it back, Jason saved the contact and slipped the phone into his pocket. I'll text you later, just to check in. You don't have to do that, Margaret said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I want to, Jason said. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder gently. Take care of yourself, Margaret, and remember what I said. Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her eyes again. Thank you, Jason, for everything. Jason gave her a small smile, then turned and started walking back toward where he had parked his car. He did not look back, but he could feel her watching him, standing there on the sidewalk with the rose in her hands. And for the first time all afternoon, he felt like he had done something that mattered. As he drove toward Emma's school, Jason thought about Margaret, about the way she had looked when he handed her that flower, about the way her smile had broken through the sadness like sunlight through clouds. He thought about the man in the coffee shop, about the cruelty in his voice, and he felt that same flare of anger rise in his chest. But beneath the anger was something else, a quiet certainty that what he had done was right. People judged too quickly. They looked at surfaces and made assumptions. They saw age and decided someone was no longer worth their time. But Jason had seen Margaret, not just today, but over the years. He had seen her kindness, her patience, the way she loved Emma without condition. And he knew that anyone who could not see that was missing something important. The value of a person was not decided by someone else's opinion. It was decided by the courage to believe you were still worth loving, even when the world tried to tell you otherwise. Margaret had that courage. She just needed to remember it. And maybe, Jason thought, today had helped her do that.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.